Broken.
Toby broke both of these masks.
So we just had it at least use it once as a props.
The skill to still wear them with one ear.
Interesting.
He's still going to wear them?
No, I'm gonna have to ditch them.
Well, we got these for free from the building. Oh, this was when there was still the community market, right?
Yeah, and this was still when we actually got something from the building, which is supposedly from local government.
Oh, yeah.
Which is once in the entire year in quarantine.
But there are a few times I've seen like relief goods downstairs in the basement, and like, are we getting any of these? Not that we would want them, but you know.
Unless those weren't relief goods, and those were just the building.
Some of them clearly said the city of Taguig, so. I have a question. Any topics?
YouTube is running. Facebook is running. Huh. Under that, my nose is itchy.
Because of the mask, mostly. Because your nose is so delicate.
And the fan. And it's always the fan that's blowing straight at my head.
It's hitting me first. It's not blowing
Still
just at you.
Hey, Karen. Nice to have you with us. Because it's a Monday, we are board game topic tonight.
What are you doing?
I did not realize in the lab had solitaire rules. Something we learned just today. Hey, Kenny.
Oops.
We'll be starting in a bit. We have a very active week ready for you for Baduy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Expect posters to come out.
I'm tired. It's been a busy day. A busy day, and then I still have 2,000 steps to do before the day is over.
See, Amy has joined us. Karen has joined us. The two Ks. Hopefully, we'll have more friends join us soon. And for those who might be watching, yes, we're still in warm-up mode.
Happy anniversary, everyone! 1 year in community quarantine, at least in Metro Manila. I'm sure the exact timeline was weird, but I know at least for the first 2 days, it was definitely Manila and surrounding provinces. And then we went into enhanced community quarantine in Luzon a few days later because whatever. So happy anniversary. We're all in this together.
We'll start in 1 minute.
Bum, ba, bum, 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 bum. Let me also prioritize the internet.
Yeah. Boy, I feel the warmth again. Man.
Super humid today.
It was raining earlier today.
But like very limited. Very, very limited. Not enough to really make a difference in the weather.
Yes, Karen, it's been too long. Totally agree.
Really? Oh.
I guess it helps to just focus on the more positive things, such as it is 9:15. This is Toby.
And this is Rocky.
And if it's your first time here, welcome to Baduy Pride, our little space on the internet where we talk about anything we want.
It's completely unscripted and not entirely accurate, but at least it's honest. Join us as we talk about everything and anything random live.
And if it's not your first time here, thank you so much for joining us again. It is another Monday episode, and every Monday we try to talk about games. We've talked about a variety of board games, and today's selection felt very apt because for the Philippines,
at least particularly Metro Manila, we've been in quarantine for exactly a year. And admittedly, we have deliberately avoided talking about this game because kind of felt too soon or like too real and all that stuff. In fact, prior to apparently one game with Nico. Apparently, we did play a game with Nico last year, but before that, we had not touched Pandemic for most of 2020, and had only played it towards the end of 2019.
There was also
Sorry, yes, we're talking about Pandemic, the board game.
There was also the fact that we got distracted. No, not distracted, but we just fell in love with the legacy version.
That is true.
But
which we also have not played in a long time.
And that will be a topic for a different episode.
Yeah, so today we're only going to talk about the main Pandemic game lines, more or less, with a few of the tertiary expansions. We won't necessarily be able to tackle all because we have kind of avoided some. So for us, we have fully embraced the Pandemic games that are all about fighting disease. When they are about fighting barbarians or unspeakable Cthulhu-like horrors, we didn't go for it yet. Maybe we will one day.
I was tempted because recently there was a secondary market.
Of course, there's a secondary market thing.
But I resisted. But let's focus first on Pandemic. Pandemic is a game released way back in 2008.
Wow, so old.
By Matt Leacock. The game is 2 to 4 players, and it has you and your friends working cooperatively to try to stop not just one, not just two, but 4 diseases that are spreading all over the world. The game has variable player powers, makes use of action points, has set collection and hand management as part of its game mechanics. As you travel around the world, trying to keep disease in check from creating outbreaks, whilst you try to gather the cards needed to build the cure.
Now, flashback. I'm just wondering, for conversation piece, do you remember your first Pandemic game?
I can't remember the specifics. I do believe it happened during one of the OGMs, as they were called, open gaming meets, which were events that were held in the Philippines even before board game cafes existed.
That is true.
And I remember when I played it, it was still everything was wooden pieces. There weren't any plastic tokens yet.
Mm-mm.
The cards were a little bit older in terms of the quality, the matte printing and all that. But they even back then it was already quite impressive again.
So now I'm trying to, because I remember you teaching me this at an OGM.
Yeah.
But that wasn't
But that
the
wasn't
same
first.
OGM.
Yeah. And that one already had plastic pieces. Because I remember when we were playing, I was like, some of
Mm.
these tokens are different.
Yeah, but so the same thing that, oh my God, I remember distinctly when Toby first introduced this to me, and it was early in our relationship
Mhm.
and early in our board game relationship.
Yes.
And I had, he was still in the process of introducing me to a lot of modern board games,
Mhm.
such as the Night of Never Ending Carcassonne. But this really blew my mind because it was the first cooperative
Mhm.
board game I had ever played.
So let's open it and check out what's inside.
So this Zeman edition
Mhm.
has a batch with a bunch of misprints.
And it's part of the charm, I guess.
It's part of the charm of our copy. But so the board game is a map of the world with all the different major like hotspots for the virus,
Mhm.
and those in the know will know that there is a missing line between Lagos and Sao Paulo.
Yes, we have that edition.
Yeah, and we used to not know that there was a problem.
And still win games.
Still win, but
with difficulties.
struggle with always yellow. The yellow virus was the worst, especially once it got to the bottom of Africa or South America.
So you'll notice that the board shows different parts of the world. The circles denote major cities, and they are color coded. Asia tends to be in the red areas. Then we have the black, the blue, and the yellow portions. That represents the four areas where the four different diseases are spreading. In the bottom, we have here a small area that allows to keep track of the diseases, and if you have unlocked their cures. There's areas for the cards, and there's even areas to keep track of things. Because this game was in one of this game. I guess you could say this game was in the golden age of the new wave of board games,
Yeah.
wherein a lot of thought was already placed in helping you understand the game when you look at it.
And this is in contrast to that lovely older era of board games where they decided the best way to get everybody to understand the rules was to make very lengthy rule books
Mhm.
and assume everybody reads them. So rule books have gotten shorter and shorter, and more information is passed on to the board. But this is definitely that key period when we were like figuring that out.
Beyond just the world map, the game comes with cards and tokens. Tokens, although here it's already mixed up with the other expansions. You have wooden tokens to show the players. The color of your token denotes the role you play in the game.
It matches the character cards.
You have tokens as well to keep track of other various things, such as the cures, the outbreaks, and the infection rate.
Mm-hmm. And that's something we need to stress, that the main goal of Pandemic is not to rid the world of disease, but to develop the cures for the four different diseases. And this is like, this rule reminder is also a tip in itself,
Mhm.
because many people get distracted by wanting to cure diseases and clean up the world, when in truth, you just need to make the cures.
Mhm.
And that's a very clever distinction that drives a lot of the unique strategy of the game.
Among the other tokens are the
Research station.
research stations. You always start with one, and that one is set in Atlanta because that's where the real
CDC is. And this is something you would only know if one, you play Pandemic, two, you encountered the Walking Dead franchise.
And then I have to open the other box because that's where we kept our cubes
Oh
for,
yeah.
for the diseases.
This is mixing with other stuff, but basically the cubes, ignore the big circles, but the cubes represent the different diseases as they spread around. These little sample dish things are specific to the In the Lab expansion, which we'll talk about a little later. But yeah, there's four different color diseases. The Z-Man editions of the game have made the diseases translucent, um, translucent plastic pieces, which actually help with readability and
Mhm.
make them distinct from the player pieces, which are wooden.
Now, those were the tokens, mostly wooden, some are more plastic, acrylic. But then you have cards. So this one includes as well some of the expansions, but you have the different player roles. So you'll notice they are color coded.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just in case you're the type of player who needs that reminder, the upper corner shows you, oh, you're blue, oh, you're brown, and so on and so forth.
Pretty clear.
Each player role has a specific power, and in many ways, the power um, dictates what your best moves are in the game. We have roles that we love the most.
Yeah. And we'll talk about our religious theories in a bit. Karen asked, "Do they come with the circular containers?" Unfortunately, the circular containers are only in the lab expansion.
Mhm.
So the base game just gives you the cubes in little baggies. In the lab gives you the little petri dish thing and the big circle ones, which represent even more disease.
Cards come in four types. Other than the player cards, you have the infection cards, which are the green background. They show the different cities because that determines where the disease spreads. You have the cure cards, which are the blue background cards, and they range from either
One-time events.
one-time event cards, which basically are bonus effects that you can do, then don't take actions to do. City cards, which represent research in those places, and if you collect five of a single color and you bring them to a research station, you can build the cure. And the last is the most evil one, the infection epidemic
Epidemic
cards.
cards.
A standard game will have four. No, a standard game will have five. A beginner's game would only have four. But if you're used to the game, you can play with as many as six. Epidemic cards are the heart of the game because they progress the disease and show how the game will try to beat your ass. Best of all, they match the cure cards.
Yes, they
Because
are mixed into the cure deck, which is very painful. Because at the end of every player turn, you will draw two cards. And if one of those cards is an epidemic
one or
card,
more.
oh, that is true. But if at least one is an epidemic card, you will go through the steps outlined on that card to
In
make
it.
everything worse.
So the game has all these components, and the way it works is every player takes a turn after they've decided on their action tokens. The player who has the first turn in the base game is whoever has the highest population city card in their hand.
Yes.
So if you happen to have India, for example, then most likely you act first. Every turn, you have up to four actions you can take. Actions range from moving, treating disease, building the cure,
building
and
research stations.
building research stations, and combinations thereof.
Yeah, we won't get into the specifics of movement because they have a lot of terminology for basically the same thing. But there's a lot of way to move around the game. We'll leave it at that.
And the trick is coordinating your motions to go around because one of the actions you can take, which is one of the most important, is sharing knowledge.
One of the most difficult.
Sharing knowledge allows you to hand over city cards to another player because, as mentioned, the only way to build the cure is to have five cards of a single color, which is such a challenge in a game where you only draw two at the end of your turn.
And your hand limit is 7. So the moment you hit 8, you must discard a card, which is very sad because you're throwing away one part of the cure.
Now, you might find yourself thinking, given the size of the cure deck, then what's the harm in going around and trying to wait for those cards? If this deck runs out during the game, you all lose.
This is one way to lose Pandemic.
Because that represents time has run out and you were no longer able to control the spreading disease. The other way
Is if you run out of disease cubes and you are supposed to place a new disease cube on the board, that is the second way to lose Pandemic.
and that way accelerates as the game plays because every end of a player's turn, we do the infect phase wherein more city cards are drawn and those are where cubes are added to the board.
Yep.
The last way is through Outbreak.
outbreaks. Yes. If we have more than 7 outbreaks as tracked on the outbreak tracker, and we'll talk about what that means in a bit, we get all the way to 8, the game ends. And that's the third way that you can lose pandemic. And there is only one way to win pandemic, which is develop the cures for the 4 diseases. Um, so as far as cooperative games go, this is a brilliant puzzle, as a lot of game reviewers like to say. In fact, so much so, Asmodi on their social media literally publishes pandemic puzzles on a regular basis, asking people to win the game based on the board state. So that's kind of fascinating. But despite the challenges, there's just so much brilliance to this and how the different player powers change each game, the combination of cards, and the group of people, and how you decide to handle your diseases.
So just to lightly touch on player power, so you have an idea on the variety. Some player powers allow you to move other player tokens even if it's not their turn, whether it's pulling them to your location or moving them specifically to other locations as if they were your own with that player's permission.
Which is like useful in between turns, because sometimes, because you only have 4 actions and every step of movement is an action, curing is an action, blah blah blah. So a lot of times trying to get around the world is very difficult because that's a lot of steps. But using that particular power lets another player give up their movement in order to move you, which may be more beneficial to the group.
Other sample powers include a guy who's able to build research stations without having to throw away a card and use those research stations as a means to jump to any location at the cost of a card. Then there is the scientist who radically changes the game because she allows you to build a cure with only 4 rather than 5, but it has to be her.
And there is the researcher who can pass cards to other players without needing to be in that city, which is a painful requirement. So the researcher and the scientist have a good chance of working together and solving that cure. But again, it still means you're banking on one player having all the cards, which is very difficult. Because again, 5 cards to cure or 4 cards if you have the researcher, still a 7-card limit.
So that pretty much covers the base game.
Yeah, I mean, like, we've glossed over a lot of the specifics in the powers. Mitch is asking, do we have a favorite character to play?
So for me, it's always the dispatcher. I feel that the flexibility offered by being able to move characters to key positions is always helpful regardless of whose turn it is.
I have a strong affinity for the quarantine specialist, whose weird power is that wherever the quarantine specialist is and all connecting cities, new disease cubes cannot be placed because she super quarantines those places. And yeah, but it's hard.
She captures what could have happened.
This is what's supposed to happen when you have an effective quarantine.
Yes.
You prevent the spread of disease
from coming in or from spreading further. If only more people played board games. Moving on from the base game, a number of pandemic expansions came out. Looking at the list from 2008, the next expansion to come out. Oh wow, this is not arranged by date. Re-implementations.
You have to look at expansions instead of re-implementations.
Yeah, well, I was at re-implementations by mistake.
Okay, one moment.
Okay, here. So On the Brink was 2009. So I guess it's the first one to follow.
Oh, wow. On the Brink is first. That's
interesting. I don't see In the Lab in this list for some. Oh, there.
2013. Yeah.
So On the Brink. Where is On the Brink? On the Brink. Here. On the Brink has the orange cover, has the awesome looking thing, and has that scary guy in the background. Tell us about On the Brink.
Bum, bum, bum. Now, On the Brink adds roles to the game. And that's like the easiest upgrade to things. 7 new roles, 8 new event cards, so like new ways to kind of support your stuff. It introduces the virulent strain and the possibility of mutations, which makes fighting the disease even more difficult.
The virulent strain is a purple set of cubes which don't follow the rules of the four colors, which make them a bit harder to deal with because you can't cure them.
That's the problem. And so, I think there are even fewer cubes of the purple one, so that makes it more likely that you'll run out of cubes when playing with the virulent strain. Mutation just adds new negative events, mutation events.
Or difficulty challenges. If you're used to the base game, if you want a bigger challenge, then you can play with mutations. Some mutations, for example, will suddenly require you to take 2 actions to develop the cure. Others might require a 6th card to build the cure, and it's all little ways to make the game more challenging if you feel like, Pandemic, I know how to play that and I've mastered it already. The third expansion that this box adds is the Bioterrorist.
Bioterrorist.
In the Bioterrorist, the game suddenly is no longer purely cooperative, as one player plays the Bioterrorist, who then secretly tracks his movement on the map as he or she spreads the cubes of disease throughout the area.
So it adds a hidden movement element to the game, which is kind of bonkers, but it works. It works that you now have to actively deal with the bioterrorist. And the bioterrorist expansion is like a great way to I mean, there's an argument against cooperative games where a lot of times you feel like one player dominates the game eventually. One player who is more knowledgeable or more experienced with the game. And that really depends on the player dynamic and how nice that person is. But if you have that annoying player in your gaming circle, make them the bioterrorist. And therefore they can apply their superior knowledge of the game into trying to defeat you all. So that's a weird recommendation. I actually originally heard this on Shut Up and Sit Down's review of Pandemic, and I totally agree. That is one way to put that player in his place. Make him a bioterrorist.
So that's On the Brink.
Admittedly, we have not played this a lot.
We don't play this a lot because we tend to introduce the game to new players.
Yes.
So we rarely get to use the expansions here. We have used some of the new roles, but not all. And we have used some of the new events, but not all. Many of the new events, however, cater more to dealing with the virulent strains and the mutations. I've been playing with some of this on the digital aspect.
I'm sure you have.
Following that is In the Lab.
Yes.
In the Lab is our favorite expansion to the base game because it is such a pretty and complicated mess that it adds.
It adds more steps to making the cure. Oh, Karen's asking, the bioterrorist is revealed early in the game. No, from the start, you know that
one player
is the bioterrorist. It's like Legendary where someone plays the villain.
But you have to, well, if you find where they are in the map,
that helps.
You can hinder their motions in the game for a few rounds, but not forever.
Admittedly, we've played this one more than On the Brink, despite the added challenge. So so this expansion adds more steps to developing the cure. So you have this little every time you cure diseases, you are collecting samples of the diseases and they go here. And then you're allowed to mix and match and whatever to come up with quantities of the disease because you're trying to match
because unlike the base game, wherein building the cure is all about simply getting 5 cards of a single color, building the cure now requires you to build the molecular structure of the cure. And these are some examples. For example, this one is these are all both there. This one is to build the blue cure, which means you have to treat disease in different places and then eventually running through the system collect enough cubes to place 4 cubes onto the sample.
4 blue cubes.
Others, however, are a bit more complicated. This one requires a mix of yellow and black cubes. However, it's because you can choose to build the yellow or the black cure. And that is a flexibility that makes it suddenly interesting because curing disease is part of building the cure. And it's now a creative decision of, wait, unahin natin ng yellow or something like that.
So I like this element to making the cure only because it's not as burdensome as the city card system. I mean, you still need city cards, but now it's a group effort to develop the cure. That
Mhm.
oh, I can get samples of blue, I can get samples of
Mhm.
red, and then sort of like it all magically comes together into the research station. So
It also
yeah,
gives that feeling that you're really trying to build the
yes,
cure. 'Cause-
especially this little thing
Mhm.
is this weird calculator.
Okay, let's just go through it real quick.
Yeah,
You'll
yeah.
notice that this symbol means from this portion, you can move to this next step, one of each color cube. So if you had in this dish, I can't there. If you had in this dish three blue and one black, then when you run it through the system and it goes here, it will only be left with one black and one blue because you took away the excess. On the other hand, this one, from here to here means you transfer all of one color. So if you were trying to gather blue, so in here you might have had blue, black, and red, but then only the blue transfer here. So it's this interesting, intricate system of moving the
And then how do we move again? That's the cards,
actions.
right? That's
It's
the
actions.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
still actions.
You still have to you're recombining to have enough sample to
Mhm.
produce because actually towards the end you can multiply.
And bear in mind, you can build more than one cure at a time. So you can be creative in which one you're targeting first. You can divide where things are going. But the trickiest part of all, which I love, is that the fact that the cubes are here, that means the cubes
Are
are not.
off the inventory
And remember, a loose condition is if you need to add cubes
and
and
you
you
run out
can't,
of cubes.
you lose.
So this one in the lab is the most extra of the pandemic expansions because you get these little dishes and you get vials to represent your cures. And yes, it has a purple one to represent the virulent strain.
And yes, they don't do anything. They literally
They're
are
just colored
pretty.
vials.
And you can simply go, we have the cure. That's the only purpose of this. Well, maybe you can also say, we're building the cure, but they don't serve any other purpose.
Super extra.
But we love them.
Yeah.
And yes, we have tried to open them. Don't do that. They don't do that.
Yeah. They're quite rigid and they are what they are. But admittedly, because of that mechanic, in the lab is actually a little easier to play
Mhm.
than, well, not easier to win, but easier to understand and incorporate into the game. So it's quick to add on.
Theoretically, also, we should keep everything here because there's slots for the player tokens and stuff. We just don't because we still love keeping things in the
Plus, we
box.
keep teaching the base game. So that's our problem.
The game also comes with bonus roles because there are roles specific to the lab. There's someone who is able to use lab actions for free. There's someone who is able to maneuver actions faster, like the virologist. Again, as mentioned, you have the mutation cards, you have the new events, and you have bonus empty cards. Why? In case you want to make your own.
Because they were preparing for Legacy, that's why.
And we know of some, I read of some people who have used the empty cards to build the cards from expansions they don't own.
Oh, that's clever.
Because at least the back matches and they can still use it. in
Yeah,
their
yeah,
games.
yeah. That's one way to get around it. So, admittedly, between the two expansions, um, in the lab feels more essential than on the break. Like if you were only going to get one pandemic expansion, in the lab is the superior expansion. It's just very smart and very extra. So I appreciate it
And
for those elements.
and
of
the
it.
cover looks less haunting, more hopeful.
But the Zeman edition of Pandemic has one main advantage. It's a poster. I tried taking a photo of this, and my arms hurt because I had to go really high to make the poster.
Yeah, see, it's so nice. I'm a bit sad that this one doesn't really.
Yeah, there's one more expansion that nope.
So let's talk about that child who was not given as much love as
Oh,
the rest.
I guess a little higher here.
Oh yeah, there. And that is state of emergency.
State of emergency, and you'll notice it prominently features not just a doctor, but animals.
State of the emergency brings in the question of if you're traveling around the world dealing with diseases, wow, they really travel so easily around, right? Because we're talking about just the major cities. But state of emergency brings in the idea of the more local regions. This means there are smaller maps. Not a smaller map, but smaller maps
Maps.
representing key locations
Upside
in
down.
key regions
Oops.
that you will want to try to go in deeper into. For example, in Asia, you have the point of access from key cities like Ho Chi Minh and the like Beijing, in order to get into that inner portion where, yes, it has to do with
Pigs.
I'm not sure which disease. I don't want to say because I might be saying something sensitive. Likewise, for Lagos, for example, and the other yellow spots, we have the monkey-related disease and the sheep-related disease.
Is that a sheep or a cow?
Cow.
Anyway,
It
animals.
comes with even more tokens. It comes with these nice green Tic Tacs. And notice a still sealed deck that we
We
have
haven't
yet to
played this
use.
one.
And a die that shows the different animals.
And new quarantine tokens, which again become all more familiar once you play Legacy.
So state of emergency has you dealing with diseases that jump from animal to humans. Sounds familiar. It introduces numerous emergency event cards, the super bug bonus cards, vaccine doses and vaccine factories. Sounds familiar. But here, you actually have people effectively doing quarantines and spreading the vaccines because people understand the importance of vaccines. In
See
many
why we haven't been
ways,
playing this game.
in many ways, this expansion I feel has the biggest contribution to what is used in the legacy games.
That's true. I mean, I feel like a lot of the elements, like, ooh, I know you. Only because I played Legacy, not
But we
because
will
of the
not
game.
state what those are specifically,
Because those are spoilers.
as to not spoil it.
But ultimately, but this one, and I know we haven't like played our copy, but we were already like not as excited by this one because it's already like, how much harder do you need Pandemic to be? Is really the question. And I guess the answer became Legacy. Legacy became how difficult we need Pandemic to be. Um, the little extra mini map travel thing to the hinterlands to get animal samples. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. It's like a bit too granular for me from a Pandemic perspective. But there are 5 more roles and 7 more events for just like playing through these sort of things.
So let's see. One of the roles is the Colonel. Sounds familiar. Yeah.
Not going to say anything.
But those are the key expansions without going into the smaller ones. There are a number of smaller expansions.
Promo cards, extra roles, blah de blah.
But as far as the base Pandemic game is concerned, that pretty much covers the collection. If you're wondering how this connects to the Legacy version of the series, know that the Legacy series stands alone.
It's standalone. Yes.
Each of the Legacy seasons, because they call it Season 1, Season 2,
can be
and
played
Season 0,
independently.
and do not have to be connected.
Yes,
But-
you don't have a save file that carries over.
But if you do play all of them, you will find nice interconnections or nods, or you can actually make those connections yourself as you build the story and see, oh, this is like when this happened and that happened.
Karen was asking, can you play all the expansions together? Painfully, yes. You can play all expansions together, which is certainly going to be a great challenge. Although I feel like your bioterrorist is going to have a field day.
One can say that a lot of cooperative games in the end they boil down to math, because there's this carefully planned sequence of actions to meet with the system that's automated in terms of the threats it's throwing out. If you will play with the expansions, then you might do better if you make sure you play also with the new roles and any of the new other cards, because those were introduced to compensate for the greater difficulty.
Funnily, if you look at the player counts on the sides of the game, they differ based on expansion. The base Pandemic is a 2 to 4 player game. On the Brink is 2 to 5, especially because there's that bioterrorist. In the Lab is 1 to 6 because it does include solo rules. And then State of Emergency is back to 2 to 4. It's just funny.
For those wondering about the legacy, which we decided not to cover in full detail for this, we'll probably make it a separate episode. But Pandemic Legacy is not a replayable legacy type of game.
But it is a game you will play at least 12 times,
Mhm.
at most 24 times,
And
which is more than most games.
and it is in many ways an experience. It's an experience in a box. It's like if you were watching a series about a pandemic and you happen to have the ability to affect the story. So it's worth the investment, and I guess we can't really say more about it without spoiling it, and
Mhm.
that's part of the reason why we don't want to cover it yet.
Mitch, of course, asked the question, what do we think is the best number of players to play Pandemic?
I'd say three.
Three is, I'd also agree, is the sweet spot. Because at two, you're scrambling to get around the world. At three, it's a pretty decent balance. At four, you feel like you're burning through cards
And
very quickly.
it's so long before your next turn comes up.
Yes, and then it's more players who gather the different city cards. We have a lot of pandemic games where we lose because the four players have like three city cards of each color, or like but then we can't make the cure because the colors aren't coming together to the right person, and figuring out which city to meet in is difficult because have you ever traveled with friends? It's so hard. It's so hard to like, oh, I'll meet you at the airport at 9. All these things. I tease. Nobody's traveling now. Okay, so but yeah, that's the primary set of pandemic games. Now, pandemic has since branched out into sort of other flavors of these
Mhm.
games.
The re-implementations of the games range from the legacy seasons to approaches to the game which we found interesting because we understand they're using the basic concepts behind it, but then they have hit us in ways we don't find interesting. The first, not necessarily in release order, is the first one we'll talk about is the only one we actually own,
Yes.
which is Pandemic Iberia. Pandemic Iberia still captures the same idea of you battling disease in a world that is not ready for it. But it sets it at a time and period which gives thematic reasons to the new mechanics.
It's Pandemic, the prequel, because it is a much earlier time,
Mhm.
and you no longer have the option to fly around the world. Instead, you must travel very carefully and, in fact, build railroad routes
Mhm.
to different cities.
Railroads allow you to travel faster without spending as much actions. You can take actions that purify water, which allows a certain area to be cleaner.
Water is important.
Because here the diseases are there, and if I remember correctly, you don't have the ability to build the cures.
Yeah.
You only have the ability to earn enough research so that the future will be prepared for the disease.
So that I wasn't expecting to get into Iberia because to be fair, this came out after the Cthulhu one, and then we're like, oh my god, what's happening to Pandemic? What are they doing? But this worked. This worked surprisingly well, and I love the new challenge because of the time play set. And
Mhm.
I love that flavor to things. I mean, like, the closest thing you have to air travel is going by boat, which is still not super fast, but that's not bad. It's not bad.
And again, you see echoes of legacy.
Yes, yes. Now, okay, I know we're giving the other games a lot of flack, which is funny because we own many Matt Leacock games. So Matt Leacock made the initial Pandemic and worked on, to some degree, many of the expansions, or
Mhm.
together in collaboration with other people. At the same time, Matt Leacock has gone on to make games outside of the Pandemic universe that use similar mechanics but are not about curing disease.
Such as
The
Thunderbirds.
the Thunderbirds game, which I love, so he applied the sort of pandemic formula to make a game about saving the world from the hood. And then there's also the Forbidden games.
The Forbidden
where-
series. Yes.
So it's Forbidden Island, Desert, and Sky, which is all about escape and building machines and things,
Mhm.
which is still fundamentally the same mechanic. So
Of having certain actions, having a modular board to some extent,
yeah,
and running around and doing things.
but I don't know. Once it came to the other versions of Pandemic, then I felt like,
What's going on?
why are we still calling it Pandemic?
So to explain that, we have to specifically identify them, and not in any specific order. There's Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu, which has you basically trying to close portals, shut down cultists, and stave off insanity before the old ones awaken. Now, mechanically, it's a great game. The themes are nice, the use of the map is great, the way the tokens and the system works is great. But we both struggle to understand why it's still called a pandemic game.
Because
If it was, let's say, Reign of Cthulhu powered by Pandemic, then maybe we'd understand that and
maybe, but
accept it more.
it's billed like this very prominently that it's still a pandemic game. So, but it's no longer about a disease. The great old ones are not a disease.
Likewise, there is Pandemic Rising Tide, which has you building dikes and pumps to protect the Netherlands from flooding. Once again,
We play lowlands. You can't fool us. That's where dikes are. But yeah, then it's like, okay, it's the same. I mean, again, I'm not faulting it entirely, and this is maybe just us overthinking it.
yeah.
Like,
I mean, we definitely are overthinking it, but we sort of feel frustrated that um, it's like saying let's say the game is called Dungeons and Dragons, but then you play the game and it's actually a game about cooking.
hmm,
Then why is it,
why is it a D&D
highlighted as
product?
Dungeons and Dragons? Maybe it should have been,
Something else.
um,
Then the latest one was like,
well, not the latest one, but
oh my
there's
God, there's another
there's
one.
Pandemic Fall of Rome, which now has you protecting Rome from from barbarians, because now the system for spreading disease is
Is
representing the barbarians spreading out. And then you have the other spin-offs which veer away from the main action system because they now use either dice rolls and other mechanics.
Oh yeah, that was like Pandemic. The Cure was the dice game,
Yeah.
which we didn't touch.
There's also Pandemic Hot Zone, which is both Hot Zone Europe and Hot Zone North America, which I think had a release concern because the actual pandemic then started when one of them was about to be released.
I guess it's the first one, North America, because the other one's build is coming out this year.
Yeah. So there was that feeling of, it felt like they were capitalizing on the pandemic when in truth the game was been in development way before the
It's
pandemic.
like people
happened.
saying that Plague Inc. capitalized on COVID. Like, no, Plague Inc. has been around for a while. So in that sense, we haven't really stretched that far. Mark Poa says, commercial-wise, it's probably because they can't market under the same creator, so they're marketed under a commonly known game style. Well, they still give like a gaming credit to Matt Leacock every time, but I don't necessarily think that he's primarily involved. I feel like they've just licensed it like from him or something.
But again, I still feel like why not just have it as a subtitle? I mean, on the flip side, we have now really frustrating things like the upcoming Terraforming Mars spin-off game,
Ooh, the Ares
expansion, which is not even an expansion of the main game, but they're calling it Terraforming Mars Ares expansion.
It's a spin-off card game. When it's funny because when you think about it, Terraforming Mars
Is a card
is a
game
card game
with a board.
already with the board. It has a very large card component, and then they just made another card game. So yeah,
It just feels confusing, and it almost makes me worry of the number of people who um, buy something expecting it to work with something else.
yeah. Mark Paul says that he has the Cure. It's popular for kids and beginner gamers. I mean, I get that. My pain with the Cure is that introducing a dice element to a game like Pandemic, where again it's about all of you working together, solving the puzzle. Every action matters, and then turning it into a game that has a chance factor. Then it's like, I mean, there is some degree of chance in the cards, but that's still something you can mitigate when you can like take a peek at what cards are coming, or you can stop it with one quiet night. Or I mean, There's just so many things you can
Yeah.
do.
It's not a bad game. It's just that we kind of find ourselves not excited at the thought that we're doing something similar, but now we're rolling to hope we
Mhm.
get the results we need.
So I mean, like in that sense, I guess that's where we stand. It's like, was this we fell in love with the core concept of pandemic, of the original pandemic, and we celebrate this every time we play it. We continue to introduce friends to the game because we love the game, and we also want to get them to a point where they can be comfortable playing the expansions, which
Mhm.
takes a while. But at the same time, um, um, it's like it's been harder for us to like embrace the other variants, or they become super low priority because they're standalone games. That's one. They don't connect to any of these
Mhm.
other games. And then the theming feels weird. It's like I pandemic, fall of Rome, barbarians are not disease. And the Cthulhu one, great old ones are not disease. And the rising tide, floodwaters are not a disease. And I feel like the behavior is very different, but applying the same mechanic may not be the same. Because when you look at the way that Leacock innovated the Forbidden Games or even Thunderbirds, the he didn't rely on the same like disease mechanic
Mhm.
spreading. He made totally different versions that fit the story very well, and then I love that. I super embrace that. So the other ones, I'm not sure. I don't
And there is that.
get it.
So, like the Forbidden series, there is actually an interconnected story hinted in the game itself. If you study the starting points and the end points of each game, you'll notice there are connections.
Yes.
The airship that you build in Forbidden Desert to escape is the same thing that crashes when you're in
Forbidden Sky.
Forbidden Sky
The helicopter that you use to escape Forbidden Island is the crashed helicopter at the
in the
beginning
desert.
of Forbidden Desert.
So you can see that there's actually an interconnected story that was hinted at, but not necessarily what's really happening.
Hmm.
But then with the pandemic spin-offs,
We're everywhere.
it doesn't feel like
We're at Rome. We're
Yeah.
in this disease in the Iberian Peninsula. We're in Norway. Why?
so there's that feeling of it really was just riding on oh, you like pandemic, then maybe you'll buy this. And that for me is a bit frustrating because one, in the case of Fall of Rome, oh, they just reskinned the disease to become barbarians. And in the case of the others, like the Cthulhu one, okay, so this one has nothing to do with diseases at all, but it still uses a similar system. And it's not bad, but it does make me question why then call it pandemic. Why not just use pandemic as a related term or I don't know, a subtitle rather than the main thing on the
And
website?
this is why we only own Iberia. And because at least they're still fighting disease and they can't cure it and it's awesome. It's like of all this, I mean, we haven't directly played, we don't own the other ones, but if you like the flavor of Pandemic, Iberia is a worthy addition. It's a worthy addition to the collection. It's a great game that still feels like Pandemic.
If you are hoping to get the expansions, someone in the local market is selling all four for just 6,000. So you might want to grab that.
The base up until
No,
State of
it's Fall of Rome,
Oh, the four spin-offs.
Iberia,
Cthulhu and Rising Tide.
and Cthulhu for just 6,000. So that's a steal because that's barely 2,000 each. See, so that's already a steal. So consider grabbing it if you want to. The person's also based in Las Piñas, if I remember correctly. So that for me was like thinking that's additional 400 for just having it couriered over.
It's not bad. It's not bad for foreign games.
So consider grabbing it if you can. Okay,
We have strategies.
Yeah, strategies. One, don't play alone. It's a cooperative game, so converse, talk, map out your plans. But even with that, don't fall into the trap of wanting so much to win that you make the game not fun for others. Because it's one thing to really discuss and plan your moves. It's another thing to think you have the best move that you mapped out and tell everyone else to do what you want.
and you're just remote controlling the other people.
Because
Then you're playing a solo game.
and if you're doing it that way, you're ruining the point of playing a cooperative game, and you're actually choosing winning over having fun with your friends.
Don't underestimate whether it is worth it or not to exchange cards when you share knowledge. I know it's painful. It's super painful to coordinate. Like, I have the Manila card,
Mhm.
and in order to give it to the person building the red cure, we need to meet in Manila,
Mhm.
and that can be difficult.
Especially without the
And if
dispatcher.
you don't have a dispatcher giving you extra moves, then it's going to be even harder. But so many times, this has been the key to victory for us, and
Mhm.
making sure and making that one pass of the card, because they might get the remaining card they need for the cure at their end of turn draw. So it's a lot of careful thought in terms of where will you end your turn.
Don't underestimate the cities that have one cube only.
Oh my
Because it's
gosh.
very easy to go, okay, they just have one, it's not yet a problem. By the next turn, suddenly they're all two, and one outbreak can cause a lot of trouble. Oh, we never explained outbreaks. Outbreaks are when a city gains a fourth cube.
So
But
you can
since
have
the
up to three.
rules don't allow it to gain a fourth cube, all interconnected cities gain a cube of that color. And that means, yes, it's possible for outbreaks to cause chain effects. They don't repeat in the chain, but if you have multiple cities already at three, and one outbreaks hitting another city that's at three,
Each city counts as an
that will
outbreak.
outbreak and may hit another city at three, and that is a terrible, terrible thing. to
Remember that
happen.
you're only allowed 7 outbreaks in the game, and we have seen games where, like, we're doing good, no outbreaks, no outbreaks, and then after one round, three. It's like, oh crap, we're halfway through. So be careful about that.
Mhm.
Um, there are natural, fun combinations of player powers that you really just need to appreciate based on what they do. Like we said earlier, the researcher's ability to pass cards to anyone works well with the scientist's ability to make a cure with fewer cards. At the same time, the dispatcher's ability to move a player around when it's not their turn is great when combined with the quarantine specialist who prevents diseases from being added to adjacent cities.
Or with the medic, who, if a cure has been found, wipes away diseases by just walking by them.
Yes, and if you throw in a dispatcher in that, then the dispatcher can move the medic around and clean cities remotely.
Mhm.
It's awesome. And so, but you just have to fully appreciate what each of your powers
Mhm.
do. And admittedly, it requires everyone to understand those rules well. Because then, because when you first look at the researcher, you can pass a card to anyone. But isn't that shared knowledge? Like, no, sharing knowledge means you must be in the same
Mhm.
city. The researcher doesn't have that constraint. You can take from that researcher wherever they
And
are.
it can be easy to overlook how those skills play a large role if you've been playing and sometimes you're like thinking of just the basic actions. So don't overlook those powers.
Um, watch your infection deck. It's weird, but you're not allowed to go look over the infection deck discards at any time. You just have to be very careful about it and take note of the cities that are coming out,
Mhm.
because every time an epidemic comes out, first it intensifies and it will take the bottommost card from the infection deck, put it on top, and that city gains 3 cubes. Then you shuffle those cards and put them back
On
on
top.
top. And so, if you have not been paying attention to what cities are in there, then you will not be prepared for where they're going to come out.
That mechanic has the beautiful simulation effect of cities that already had disease start getting disease faster.
It's like, when someone says they got a dangerous disease and then a few months later they got it again. Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. Last few would be don't be discouraged if you lose. A large part of the fun of the game is realizing how you won, how you lost, and how your actions may or may not have contributed to that win or lose.
We're pretty experienced players, and even at easy difficulty, we have still lost
Mhm.
games. but and normally it's always like 1 or 2 steps away from the cure.
And that has not reduced the fun of the game for us.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're the type of person who thinks winning is the only reason to play this, then maybe it will, and that's fine too if that's what works for you. But for us, we've learned that these aren't games. It's not about the winning for these games.
It's
It's
the
about
experience.
and it's about how you try to work with the other players to see if you can, make the impossible happen.
And you make a little story about it. I mean, like, it's stupid things like bugger it, Manila is infected again.
Of course, it's Manila.
And how do I get to Manila? I have to go to LA pa to get to Manila. It's so annoying. It's like there are certain only connected routes that get you to Manila.
We've had games wherein we're like, okay, we're abandoning Hong Kong.
Oh
Like,
my
what? We have to abandon Hong Kong. It's the only way we can do this. But paano shopping? It's nonsensical, but that's what makes the fun. That's what makes the good memories.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like how nobody wants to go to South America because it's so long a route down.
And it's parang once you're there, you can't leave.
Yeah, I'm stuck curing yellow
Because once you're there,
forever.
other yellow cubes come up. Stay there. You're the only one there. What? But I have. No, you have to stay there. And it's just those great stories.
Oh, and then the other thing, I guess, from a general like recommendation is be very tactical about your research stations. I have yet to win we've yet to really like happily win a pandemic game with only the Atlanta research station.
Especially since you need those to create the cure.
Yeah, so the basic thing that's good about research stations is that you can always build the cure, but there's funnily one of the methods of movement is called the shuttle.
Where you
service.
shuttle from station to station.
Yeah, the stations have regular flights that visit one another. So then putting stations at strategic locations around the map, preferably on the borders of colors. So like in between where red and black intersect or where yellow and black intersect, is great for maneuvering around as you're trying to deal with the diseases.
Mitch asks if there's a technique about how to put the epidemic cards. The rules do state that you first shuffle all the cards without the epidemic cards, distribute cards to players,
2 cards each.
and then depends on the number of players.
Oh, that's true.
And then you divide that into a number of decks equal to the number of epidemic cards you're using. So if you're playing only with 4, then you create 4 decks. If you're playing with all 6, you create 6 decks. That way, there's some level of space between epidemic cards, but that doesn't mean that the
You can still have a double epidemic.
rare double epidemic thing still happens, because in one deck it might be the bottom card, and then in the next deck it might be the top card.
Yeah, but Mitch, it's not a technique, it's a rule. So remember, read your rule book and prepare your game properly. If not, yes, you will skew towards disaster all the time. What else? Oh, and you have to pay attention to your cure deck in terms of the number of city cards that are left. Because again, I think the most common way that we have lost pandemic is that we run out of city cards.
We thought there was still time, or we threw away too many of one color and we realized, oh my god, we can't build a cure.
Yeah.
And that is such a terrible, terrifying, but awesome feeling, because it really just tells you, next game we have to focus, we have to pay attention, and it's awesome.
Yeah. And it's all the things like, ultimately it's a lot of needing to pay attention to all these different variables. And as much as like you can be complacent when a particular player is gathering the colors of one cure, because like maybe by the second round they have 3 blue cards, then maybe he's gonna build the blue cure. But especially towards the end of the game, you have to pay attention to how many rounds are left, how many cards approximately are in the deck. Because even though, let's say if it were a game where like it's me, player 2, and Toby can build the cure, but we're already running out of city cards on my turn, then it was too late. We missed out something. So don't just rely on like automatically who has the most colors. I mean, that's a good start, but then sometimes like, oh crap, if we do the math, we don't have enough turns to get to him. So he needs to pass those cards. So we have to meet in Chicago and pass the blue cities. Yeah.
Mitch mentions as a tip, try to stick to your role. I don't necessarily feel you're limited to your role, but I do state
Understand the
that
role.
the point of your role is that instead of just the 4 actions per turn you can do, you might actually have the equivalent of 5 or 6 actions because your role either removes an action step or gives you a bonus effect that normally will take additional actions to do. So using your role is always very, 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 very good. But if you're doing nothing but your role, you might be so absorbed in it you're not helping everyone else.
Yeah, but I guess on the same contrast, if you never use your ability, ooh, might be something wrong. Because like the abilities inform a strategy that you and your fellow players can
Capitalize on.
attempt.
Yeah.
So you should be able to use it a few times.
Mitch mentions, have we talked about those pandemic tournaments? So I know there have been a number of tournaments. I know some of our friends joined them. For me, not my thing. I again, that for me is leaning towards the win mindset of the game, which for me kind of takes away the fun of the game
Mm.
because it's no longer about the story or no longer about thinking of what strategies to do, but more what's the optimal move given the puzzle. And I don't want to view games that way because then, in as much as yes, mechanically, many of these games are jigsaw puzzles with lots of parts. If I reduce the game to that, then it will no longer be fun for me. It's just like saying, if you play certain, let's say, computer role playing games and the like, there are optimal builds.
Mm-mm.
And for some, that's what makes it fun,
Yeah.
finding a way to build it. For me, if I were reduced to just doing the optimal build, then I feel like I'm not playing. I'm just doing what this build expects. Then it's no longer something fun for me.
Yeah, I mean, like it's sort of like the pros and cons. Like there are some people who like quote unquote creating munchkins in D&D, and others say that it's like it reduces the game to just the really basic stats. Or the same thing, it's like I love playing Diablo. I love the story, but then the season play sometimes does get swallowed up by the whole. These are the best builds for the season, so everybody's going to be a necromancer this season, and it's like, oh, we're all doing the same thing.
To give a less because Munchkin sort of has that negative connotation, but it's sort of like if you enjoy playing chess, and chess is about you have to win.
It's true.
Then maybe the tournaments would be something you'd enjoy too, because it's about optimizing strategy and making sure that puzzle is perfect.
And imagining chess pieces on the ceiling.
But then, like me, I've tried playing chess on the app. I find it fun, but sometimes I find it frustration because I feel like I'm playing wrong rather than I lost. And I guess I'm fine with that being in chess games. But when it comes for games like this, I'd rather it feel like, it was a loss in that story rather than, oh, we weren't playing optimally.
So yeah, I mean, like everybody defines their fun in different ways, but
Yes.
that's like how we approach this. And I do kind of miss playing Pandemic more. I definitely miss us finishing our Pandemic Legacy seasons. We actually have season 0, which we haven't touched because we kind of want to finish season 2 first. But this is definitely not a game. In terms of like when you have the base game, it's not a game that supports well playing online. There is an official Pandemic app which lets you play the main Pandemic games, but not the legacy games. The legacy games is a strictly in-person experience
So far,
so far.
because we've seen some board games that have opened a digital version of their legacy game. Charterstone has that.
Oh,
I believe
yes.
Gloomhaven also has, or at least
It's in beta.
has it coming. Yeah. So there are approaches that are doing that. And again, I will always state legacy games are not as terrible as you think. Some of you might be thinking, why buy something and I'll only play it a limited time? How many times have you played some of your board games? Have you actually played them more than 12 times? You might be surprised that some of your games you've only played them 3, 4 times. And that means a legacy investment actually isn't so bad.
And it beats the price of like an escape room or a movie ticket. So even depending, because it's an experience that you share with others and
Well, back when we could spend our time
and
with
share
others.
experiences. And guys, it's quarantine. It's 10 p.m. So the quarantine's already the curfew's in effect. Ooh, curfew.
But yes, it has been a year, and we are at least happy that generally we are still okay.
Mm-hmm.
In hopes of helping our mental health, staying productive, and making sure all of you as well, whom we love, can share in these moments. Baduy Pride has a number of episodes coming up.
So, hey, did you notice Toby put together a little social sharing template for us so that we,
I wonder
you
if you can
know,
put the logo somewhere on the screen. Not yet.
no,
That's not okay.
unless I pay and remove
It's a paid.
restream
It's
in
a
the
paid.
corner. Yeah, yeah.
We'll just
Um,
print it out there.
but then more importantly, because we're doing a guest episode after a very long time of not doing guest episodes, and we're about to post this after the episode, but we're gonna
Mhm.
share it now. But this Friday we are going to be. Oh, let me remove the caption. This Friday we are going to be interviewing again MC Black, who was on the show previously, together with Mrs. Tan and Clea Torres, because they'll be talking about their new exciting initiative called the Drag Academy.
Yes.
So they are putting together a little effort to help new drag queens
Mhm.
learn more about the art and get started.
There's a lot of exciting news about it. I'm not sure if we're already allowed to talk about the details,
Yeah.
so we won't.
Mhm.
But join us on Friday as we hear from them. We hear about their plans, their dreams, why a drag academy, and what to expect. And we hope that you will be there to join us when that happens.
Yeah, we're super excited for this. It's going to be our first like panel discussion, so it's going to be a lot of people. And then we're going back to doing more of these features with our drag friends. We haven't mapped out the next ones, but definitely like on the lineup is talking to the group that ends up being called Antutances, which is they're a Sunday performing group of our friends, and then all these other things. So exciting stuff. It's been a sequence this year of like trying to announce schedules now. So it's 2 weeks of us announcing schedules for the week, and then now there's like little posters, and then now we're doing guests again. So we're very very excited for how things are gonna go. Pandemic.
But yeah, I guess that is our Monday episode. As always, Mondays are about board games, and this was our episode all about pandemic.
The ones about diseases.
The game where people actually try to stop the diseases.
All right. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, you can fill up the Google form at bit.ly Baduy Pride Ideas. We love to get your suggestions for episodes, and we continue to work on featuring all of them. You can follow us on Twitter, all Toby No Shade, RG Sunico.
You can also check out our blog, baduypride.com, for all the previous episodes and stuff about us.
Feel free to continue the conversation in the comments below. Let us know about your pandemic wins and maybe even your near misses, because I think the near misses make for better stories a lot of times. And of course, be sure to subscribe for notifications, whether on Facebook or YouTube, so you don't miss our next live stream. Once again, I'm Rocky.
And I'm Toby.
And this is Baduy Pride. Have a good evening, everyone.
Stay safe.
But stay at home. It's curfew.